I think. The expectation that God helps those who help themselves, right? God rewards those who put in the hard work. God provides blessing or salvation according to the merit provided by the one who's being saved. That perspective is on full display here by
Yes.
the people who contracted for the full day. They're not thinking about the covenant that they have with this person or the contract they have with this person. They're not thinking about the fact that they agreed to work for the day to earn a day's wage. They're thinking about how this actually is going to work out great in their favor. They're looking at this as a strictly merit-based thing. And you would think that, like, when the 1 hour people come in, they get a denarius, and then the 3 hour people come in and they get a denarius, you'd think they would pick up on it. But in the course of the parable, it doesn't seem that they do. They still get to the bottom of the list and think they're going to get more compared to the other people who all got the same.
Welcome to episode 488 of the Reformed Brotherhood. I'm Jesse.
And I'm still Tony, and this is the podcast where Tony comes back. Hey, brother.
Brother, the band is back together again. Man, it's reunited, and boy, do you feel it? It feels good,
I
doesn't it?
do. I do. I'm excited to come back. It was nice to take a break.
Good.
I've been, texted with you a couple times. I did my best to sort of not think about the podcast because that's sort of defeats the purpose of taking a break from something if you spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I'm back. I'm refreshed. I'm ready to go. I appreciate the listeners' patience. It's been sort of a weird, crazy, busy time at work. There's a lot going on. I lost like 60% of my staff in the course of like 3 weeks, and I'm still kind of in the thick of it, but we're coming out of it. So took a little bit of time to just make sure that I was having an appropriate space to de-stress from that and take care of my family and attend to worship. And it was really a blessing to have that sort of sabbatical. Ironically, the sabbatical wars were going on at the same time on Twitter. And Jesse is blissfully unaware of that because he's not involved in the Twitter.
It's true.
But yeah, just took a little break, and it's kind of like overblown to call it a sabbatical. Like, this is a podcast, it's a hobby. but it was nice to have a little bit of extra time, a couple hours extra week, each week of extra time to just decompress and play with the kids and spend time with my wife and clean the house a little bit, which was good.
Yeah, it is. Always good to have a clean house. You look great. You seem refreshed. The voice sounds good. And I'm like, I don't know, in year 7 or 8 of my Twitter sabbatical. It's going great so far. I feel like I haven't missed a whole lot. The world still seems wild, and I'm sure, or X, right? We got to go X on this.
It's always Twitter. It's always going to be Twitter. I don't
Okay,
care
I'm
what
fine.
Elon Musk says.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. And I teased this in the last episode, but we can't be stopped. I mean, people should know this by now. We have an inexorable march through the parables of Jesus that
It's
will
true.
not be stopped. We're always going to come back until there are no more. And on this episode, we're going to be hanging out in Matthew 20, talking about laborers in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I'm excited to get back into it. I'm excited to get back into the word together with everybody. I'm
okay.
excited to
It's
clear whatever that
emotional.
was in my throat out
Emotional.
live on the air. But yeah, it'll be good. I'm stoked. I mean, I love this stuff, and it's good to be back.
Yeah, listen, you had the rest. Now let's talk about labor. So speaking of labor, it's time for you to work up here, Tony. Are you affirming with or denying against on this episode?
I'm affirming something, and I'm hopeful that just a little behind the scenes activity here. Jesse recorded episode 487 like an hour and a half ago. I have not yet listened to it, so I don't know if you did an affirmation, and if you did, I hope it's not the same one.
I did not. You're safe.
Good, so I'm safe. So I'm affirming the Artemis 2 mission.
Oh, nice.
Have you been? I mean, I know you're not on Twitter, but I'm sure there's news elsewhere. This amazing mission around the moon, four astronauts, I think. The furthest manned space travel since the Apollo program. Pretty intense, pretty amazing pictures, right? The camera technology has increased exponentially since we were there last. This is ostensibly in preparation for an actual moon landing, which who knows when that will be. But as far as I've seen, the mission was a resounding success. There was no, I think they ran into a few little hiccups early on with some technical things, but nothing crazy. I have not heard, I know they did touch down and they did reentry. I've not heard anything one way or another, but I'm assuming since I have not heard terrible, tragic news that they made it through. Did they do the reentry? Apparently I'm not actually paying as much attention to this as I thought I was. I saw a lot of information about reentry, but I guess I don't know for sure when that happened or is happening.
I mean, by this point, when people listen to it, it'll be old news anyway, right?
For
So
sure.
I'm
Yeah, and
trying to
either
fill
it
you.
went terribly wrong and I'm gonna feel awful, or it went fine and I'm gonna feel a little silly for throwing the caveat that it went terribly wrong out there. But it's cool. It's amazing. I mean, I commented to my wife the other day and she's kind of like, yeah, maybe we should like spend that money on people who are on the planet. I was like, okay, I can buy that wisdom, but
There.
there's something very cool and very Genesis 1-esque, Genesis 1 and 2 ask about flying out into space and taking dominion
Yeah,
over
for sure.
a little ball of rock, 25,000 miles away or whatever it is. Um, and I'm like an engineering nerd. I don't know anything about engineering, but I love watching YouTube videos that explain stuff like this. And
Me too.
all of the videos that have cropped up now about free return and how like they're able to basically like do minimal burn on the thrusters to get into the right trajectory and then just like meet the moon in the place it's going to be. And then the moon's gravity captures it and whips it back around and then shoots it back towards Earth. And for the most part, they're able to do all of that with relatively minor energy output because they're just utilizing physics and gravity and math to fly to the moon and come back. It's pretty
Yes.
crazy. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing.
And the photos of like the sort of like new versions of the Earthrise photos are really, really phenomenal. They're crisp, they're clean. They're obviously like the best actual photographic images we've had of the lunar surface. Um, and the far side of the lunar surface, which we get all sorts of like telescopic photos and things of this side of the lunar surface because it's tidally locked and is facing us at all times. We don't get a ton of really great photography of the far side of the moon, which is a big part of what this mission was. So,
Right.
yeah, if you haven't seen the photos, I mean, they're out there, they're amazing. There will be even more available once we get back. They're transmitting only the most stellar, amazing ones, but they're taking, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of photos and so yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm affirming the Artemis 2 mission. Um, it's just amazing what people can do with common grace,
That's right.
insight into nature. I don't know anything about the astronauts. I don't know anything about their religious faith or their spiritual life or anything like that. But the people who design this, the people who fly they're just tapping into the truth that's present in God's creation. So good on them. Either I'm glad they got home, wish they have a safe home coming, or something along those lines. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, you'll be happy to know that NASA is reporting that the 4 astronauts are in excellent condition after it
Good,
landed in the Pacific Ocean. So
good.
all appears to be well. And it says they have a giant SD card of pictures
Yeah,
that they've been
yeah,
taking and
I'm
saving.
sure.
They were just
Yeah,
they were just too big to send over Wi-Fi.
yeah, like massive wide.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they have a ton that they didn't send because
Right.
data rates to the moon are pretty
Yeah.
high, and
Yeah.
this economy is crazy. So
Exactly. In this economy? Really? In this economy? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. I think you're right. This is good. I haven't talked about this at all. It's hard not to get just stoked, even in an amateur way, about the science, the technology, the physics of all this stuff. And then even the astronauts just being overwhelmed by what they're seeing.
hmm,
It's hard not to get pulled into that and think about the universe that God has created and find that there is something transcendent just by observing all of these
yeah,
things, like even casually, which I think shows again, this is literally the heavens and the earth crying out for God, showing his immeasurable power and, immortal nature. It's incredible that we can even see and be a part of some of these things. Just
yeah,
wild.
yeah. And I think it's crazy that they can get signals to the moon. I mean, I
Yeah.
drive home from Dartmouth College, and I go through half of the spot there, and I don't have a cell signal, but we can get images from the moon. Um, so yeah, it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Check it out if you haven't seen it. If you haven't heard about it, I don't know what you're doing. This is probably the largest major scientific advancement in our generation
For
in
sure.
terms of like big scale scientific enterprise projects. There's been a lot of really amazing technology that's been developed, but this is like the first big, almost like risky kind of scientific,
Right.
I don't know, gambit or I don't know, gamble that we've done in a long time. I
It's a
mean, a
big
lot of
deal.
things, nothing went wrong, nothing major went wrong. Praise God that they all got back to the planet safely.
Right.
But a lot of things could have gone wrong and they didn't. So check out the photos, check out the scientific data they're going to get. I mean, I'm sure they've got all sorts of information about the way the spaceship moved, all of that stuff. It's going to be really interesting to see kind of how this all comes about.
Get some worship on, right? I mean, this is
Yep.
what a thing to be reminded about how big and how glorious God is.
Yeah.
And to realize, like you said, the risks of this exploration. And this is God again creating all of this out of nothing. Why?
Yeah.
Just absolutely wild,
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah,
I'm
for
blown
sure.
away.
Yeah. What about you, Jesse? What do you got for us?
I got affirmation. It's equally nerdy. And actually, this is, as is always the case, is why one of many reasons I missed you is it dovetails so nicely. So I'm affirming with a book. It's called Everything is Predictable: How Bayesian Statistics Explains the World. It's by a guy named Tom Chivers. I know this sounds super nerdy, but hear me out on this, because Thomas Bayes, if you don't know this guy, is first kind of like a wild and interesting guy. But this whole theory he put forward is super interesting. And this book is not like a mathematics book. It's like reads almost like a statistical thriller, which as it came out of my mouth, realized that was not maybe more ingratiating. I could have chosen better words than statistical thriller. But Thomas Bayes was alive in the 1700s. And what's interesting to me, at least about him, is he was an English statistician who was a Presbyterian minister. Actually, he was a nonconformist. And
Ooh.
this whole theorem that he developed was actually published after his death. And the nonconformist part is super interesting. It's all in this book, even some of his different theological ideas. But because he was nonconformist, it basically meant like he couldn't learn. He was kicked out of all the English universities. He had to go to Scotland. Even all of that shaped how he came up with this particular theorem. But the gist of it is, rather than treating like probability as we think about it as this fixed frequency, how many times does this thing occur? He argued and realized that it should represent a degree of belief. And then you would update that belief rationally as new evidence comes in. And I know that sounds super quaint, but this is like what machine learning is based on, medical diagnosis. A lot of like space travel is based on this in terms of understanding uncertainty in systems, spam, all of that stuff. Here's an example, I think, Tony, because we have to carry forward with the top 50 medical podcast thing
Right.
we've got going on. Here, let me just give everybody an example of why you need this and why you automatically think this way. So statistics is really important, especially in medical testing. This was really prevalent during COVID. So there's two ways that you can describe how a medical test performs. You know this already, Tony, you're an expert. So one would be like sensitivity. So like how
Hashtag not
good,
an expert.
oh, you're definitely an expert in testing. Here we go. So one would be like sensitivity. How good is the test at catching people who are sick? So if you're sick, you want the test to identify that you're sick. That's sensitivity. So a test with a 99% sensitivity is going to correctly identify 99 out of 100 people who are truly sick. It only is going to miss one person. It's a false negative. The other half of that coin is something called specificity. So if sensitivity is all about catching the people who are sick, specificity is going to say, how good is the test at clearing people who are not sick? And so a test with 99% specificity, you might have correctly guessed, is going to identify or clear 99 out of 100 healthy people. Now, if you have a test that's both of those, 99% sensitive and 99% specific, you might be thinking, that is the dream. That's exactly what I want. That test is going to be so precise and accurate. How could my intuition fail me? But this is the thing. It actually fails all the time. And here's why. Let's say that you go out and you screen a group of people, a general population, for a rare disease that affects 1 in 1,000 people. 1 in 1,000 people, rare disease. So if you screen 10,000 people from the general population, that means that truly only 10 of them are going to have the actual disease. I'm not going to do all the math because this is already making for amazing podcasting. But here's the bottom line. That test, which sounds so good on the face, is going to identify 109 people as truly sick or truly having the disease. But the problem is that only 10 of them actually have it. That means that it only has a success rate of 9%. There's only a 9% chance you actually have the disease, but it's falsely identified. The short end of this is Bayes corrects that problem. He fixes it with his theorem so that we get to the right number of people. That's what's called like a Bayes fallacy rate. It's not taking into account that really only 10 people should have this particular disease or this sickness. So I know that sounds super nerdy, but so much of our lives are based on this. We have a prior belief or a prior set of things that we understand about the world. And then as evidence comes in, we refine that. That sounds so normal and normative, but it's revolutionary. In this book, actually, Bayes versus what's called like frequentist or frequent probability is like hotly debated. People actually throw down over this theorem. So it's a really fun read. Go check out Everything is Predictable: How Bayesian Statistics Explains Our World. It really is for everybody. And then you can impress your friends with all the statistical prowess you can have when you're done reading it.
Yeah, like the medical administrator hat that I can't always take off is like, why would we screen 10,000 people Are they all symptomatic? Are none of them symptomatic? But I
Well,
suppose it
so
doesn't really
that's a
matter
great
for the
question. So,
example.
so generally what happens here is, let's say it's like some kind of rare form of cancer. Unless you use Bayesian statistics, what you'll find is you'll get these false positive rates. So these tests do use Bayesian statistics. It corrects, in other words, for this problem. So there might be a lot of people that are going to screen for this because if you want to know if you have it, but you don't want to get it wrong and say that you do. So this ensures, his approach ensures that you get it right. It's wild.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I would think actually, there's other mechanisms as well where they would sort of screen out people that shouldn't be tested or help identify false negatives, false positives. But yeah, that's interesting. I probably won't read that book, but it sounds like an interesting read. I just don't have a lot of room on my TBR shelf.
Yeah,
So
listen, that's fair. By the way, here's like a side affirmation I think you and I both share. Speaking of books and cataloging books, if you use Goodreads, right? Finally adding the
yeah,
list of the did not finish book. That's
yeah,
fantastic. This might be an example for some people. So pick it up, and even if you don't have a place for it, guess where you can put it? On the did not finish list.
yeah. Yeah,
Goodreads.
that's
Finally.
one of those like why didn't they add that 15 years ago kind of updates? And you get the email and they're like, "We're so excited to introduce the did not finish thing," and we're like, "Yeah, like of course, like duh." It's like we're proud to introduce that your keypad now has a 0 on it.
Right.
So yeah, I'm
Right.
excited about the DNR, the DNF. I'm so excited, I can't even remember what it's called.
Yeah.
The
Listen,
shelf, but
the
very
DNR
very
list is
useful.
it's a different list. Speaking of medical things, it's a different
Yeah,
list.
yeah, that's definitely a different thing. Usually,
Yeah.
it's not a list.
Well,
It's a list of one in most cases. Yeah, you can't put other people on your
I
DNR
suppose,
list.
yeah, I should clarify that. You can only really put yourself, or I suppose somebody for whom you have that kind of authority over, on that list. But I was thinking that more from like a medical perspective, that somewhere there would be a database in which there might be a list of DNR. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
I
I
don't know.
don't. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I
Probably
mean,
there was at some point, but I think with medical chart technology now, that's probably like a moot point. They
yeah.
don't need to be able to like cross reference a master list anymore. They just look in the patient's electronic record.
I,
We're really like in the weeds here. You can
we
tell
are.
it's been a while since I've podcasted. I don't really remember how to do this.
This is great. I think at this point we try to make some kind of awkward segue that is mildly successful. Again, probably has statistically like a 20 to 27% chance of being successful and really hitting the mark. So,
Yeah.
do you have anything that's going to move us into this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you've been podcasting for the last several weeks without me, and I've been working hard, and now I'm kind of coming in as Johnny come lately, and we're going to get paid the same amount. So even though you've worked harder for longer, and I'm coming in late to the game here,
Oh man, please, loved ones, please tell me you got that. Please tell me you got all of that. That's
yeah,
what you show up for here.
that
Yeah.
was a
So
deep cut.
that was beautiful, and I think it leads us right into Matthew 20. So I think we've got at least 16 verses to get through here. Maybe again, if we're going to keep a statistical theme here, something about engineering and math, all that stuff, we'll let everybody else pick the over or under and whether or not we're going to get through this and how many verses that's going to be. But at this point, we might as well begin.
Yes, yeah. I'll start by reading. We're here in Matthew chapter 20, the first 16 verses. This is the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, and it reads, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into the vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went. Going out again about the sixth hour and the ninth hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, 'Why do you stand here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' And he said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.' And when the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the laborers and pay them with their wages, beginning with the last up to the first.' And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' And he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give the last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?' Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first and the first will be last. Now, I just want to head this off. I did bite my tongue earlier, and I probably am lisping. And this is like a running gag. We thought that we'd resolved it. So if you hear me stumble over my words a little bit, it's just the struggle bus today.
Listen, these are like the real things we have to deal with when the
Yeah.
podcasting, like the real
Yeah.
threats, the real injuries. I appreciate you like working through it. Like you just get back up and you walk it off with your tongue.
Yeah, my podcasting hiatus was actually just a recovery of the last time I bit my tongue. I just needed a couple weeks to. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we don't want to say.
Yeah, so Jesse, this is a parable that follows right on the heels of
Right.
kind of everything we've been talking about. And I think as we go through these parables and we look at them and we sort of pick them up and we look at the different facets of them, we sort of compare them to each other, we kind of place them in their context. Really, they all have basically the same theme, right? Like they're
Right.
all kind of circulating around these same topics. In this parable, it's circulating around this idea that the owner of the vineyard, the master of the vineyard, is allowed to pay the people he employs whatever he wants, and as long as the payment that is due to an individual is received by that individual, then what other people receive and how they receive it and how hard they've worked and how hard they didn't work, that's really not germane to whether or not the laborer received a fair wage in the first place.
Right.
So we're circling around themes of kind of fairness, of sort of resentment. I think for resentment at the master's generosity, which has been a big theme in previous ones. So this will be good for us to expand on. There's always little nuggets and kernels of things that are different from other parables, and then it's interesting to always see the ways that they kind of line up and tell us similar things.
And this parable is unique to Matthew. And it
Yeah,
does function as this exposition or expansion of what Jesus says in chapter 19, where he says, but many who are first will be last, and the last first, which is repeated with this lovely, like inverted emphasis in at the end of this, as you just read. So it belongs to this like interesting cluster of teacher teachings on discipleship and reward, nature of the kingdom of God. And we've spoken a lot about that. I think I was just reminded of this as you were reading this. I feel like I remember this from some teaching. Like this parable is kind of like a unique chiasm that's anchored on the landowner's sovereign generosity, which you brought up. And then there's the complaints of the first hired, which is mirrored by the latecomer's vulnerability, and then the landowner's two speeches, which divide everything, kind of provide a sandwich, and like the theological climax. It does start in that really familiar way, which we've gotten accustomed to thinking about, that introductory formula of the kingdom of heaven is like. And it signals, of course, that what follows is not going to be a lesson in economics, but it's going to use all this economic language as an analogical disclosure for how God's kingdom operates. And it starts again, like you said, with this master of the house, which to me seems pretty clearly like a God figure himself.
yeah,
That's kind of like a reoccurring Matthean image, I think. So we've got this vineyard, which of course has all this symbolism, is deeply rooted in Israel's covenant imagination and evokes God's people and his redemptive labor among them. So, man, now that I'm saying this all out loud, is this thing like super pregnant with all kinds of like imagery and meaning?
yeah, yeah. And it's always good to remember, although parables have kind of some parables, most parables have sort of discrete symbolic elements where like represents that, this represents that, almost in an allegorical form, and in some cases like purely an allegorical form where it's
Right.
like Pilgrim's Progress, where each individual, each entity, each location, each represents some sort of symbolic value. But we have to remember that when it says the parable of the kingdom of heaven is like the master of the house, it's not just like the master of the
Yes.
house.
Right.
It's like this whole scenario.
Yes.
It's like blah 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 blah. It's like everything that follows. It's like the entire pericope here. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. And one of the things that I think is striking about this is the kingdom of heaven is like some people complaining, like the people
Yes.
complaining about some people are getting the same wage for less work. That is part of what the kingdom of heaven is like. So I think we sometimes think of the kingdom of heaven in the parables. We think of it as though God is just saying this is what heaven is like, right? Jesus just saying like this is what heaven is like. But the kingdom of heaven, that language is broader than what we normally would say is we're thinking of heaven, like in the spiritual abode where God lives and the angels live, where the departed saints are waiting for the resurrection. The kingdom of heaven is also inclusive of the sort of like time now between the victory of Christ on the cross and the consummation of the kingdom and the last day. The kingdom of heaven is inclusive of that time period too. And so this parable sort of situates us, I think it situates us in that pre-consummated state
Right.
where we're talking about what it's like to be a part of the kingdom of heaven here and now in our fallen state, but still solidly in the kingdom of heaven. Because there's not going to be any complaining or grumbling about God's justice and God's fairness once we're in the final resurrected state, right?
Sure.
Nobody's going to be looking back and be like, yeah, you were way too gracious for that guy. Nobody's going to be playing the Jonah part when we're all resurrected and we're worshiping for all time going forward. So this parable, because there are elements of dissatisfaction or elements of grumbling or complaining, similar to like the parable of the prodigal son. There's this son figure, the older son figure who like is just a bonehead and doesn't get it. Well, that can't be talking about the people who are in the resurrection kingdom, in the final kingdom. It's got to be talking about people who are still awaiting the resurrection of the body and who are still not yet. And even in that parable, the older son doesn't even seem to be a figure who's regenerate. Maybe he
Right.
does become regenerate at some point in the future, but he doesn't seem to be even in God's kingdom. He doesn't seem to be even among God's people. He's consistently placed outside of the field. You don't even know he exists until like halfway through the parable. This is similar in that there are these workers, they're receiving their wages, and some of them are outwardly dissatisfied and grumbling against the master of the house. So I think if we think about parables as describing heaven rather than the kingdom of heaven, we can lose sight of what's actually being said in a lot of them.
Yeah, that's really good stuff because it strikes me that there are like strangely two groups here mentioned. I find this really kind of fascinating. I think we should talk about this. Like the first group has like the most formal agreement. It's almost a legal contract. The
Right.
denarius was like a standard day laborer's wage, sufficient mostly for subsistence. And so that detail seems theologically loaded to me. These workers relate to the landowner on the basis of a contract and what is owed. And so their claim at the end of the day will be exactly that. They're owed something and they know it. And that sets up then this contrast with a second group, which is mostly all about grace. Because by the time we get to that third hour, like approximately like 9 a.m., then we're beginning this pattern repeated at the sixth and the ninth hours. And crucially, for those workers who go out and get recruited, there's no wage that's specified for them, only the promise of
Right.
like whatever is right. And so they enter the vineyard not on the basis of a contract, but on the basis of like the owner's word and character. And that seems to be like more a picture of trust and not calculation.
Yeah.
It's separate than like the first group. And that marketplace idleness, as I read this, doesn't imply like laziness because verse 7 clarifies like they just had not been hired. They were
Right.
overlooked. They were unemployed. They were marginalized. So it does set up, like you said, everything you just talked about the kind of this, I like that, like the Jonah whiners or whatever. Like
Yeah.
they want to complain about this.
Right.
There are two separate groups that have kind of been brought into the fold, not under different terms or pretenses, but differently.
Yeah. And I think too, it bears saying, although there are elements of parables that are very, very directly applicable,
Mm,
we shouldn't read this as though every specific thing in the parable is not a parable, right? I
right.
think we can look at this and we can go, you can read this in a way where, oh yeah, there's some people who actually earn their wage, they earn their
Right.
denarius,
Right.
it's a fair contract, and they work all day. And he says, well, I'm going to give you what's right, what I owe you. The reality is God doesn't owe any of us anything,
Right.
right? He owes us wrath and judgment and destruction. And so even the people who are the hard workers in the kingdom of God don't merit and never could merit, in a certain sense, in a strict sense, and stick with me before you send your angry emails. In a real strict sense, even Adam couldn't merit what was guaranteed to him according to the covenant of works. God had to condescend to make the covenant of works in order for Adam to have any sort of fruition of his blessedness. So there's no natural obligation, strict obligation that God has to reward the work of his creatures because
Right.
nothing they could do could ever be sufficient enough to obligate him. So the obligation of himself, and this is where I do think this is strong. The fact that he obligates himself to these workers to give them their denarius after a hard day's work
Exactly.
is itself a covenantal, contractual, yes, but I actually read this as sort of a covenantal thing. And the strange part is that the people don't recognize the sort of semi-gracious covenantal nature of
Yes.
this. I think, there have been times where I've been unemployed, Not for very long. Now, I know some people face unemployment for a lot longer than I ever have, but I know there was times where I was looking for work, and someone would say to me like, "Hey, my lawn needs to be mowed. Could you come over and I'll give you $25 to mow my lawn? It's a small lawn." Um, that's a gracious act in most cases, right?
Right.
Yes, I'm performing a task. Yes, they're paying me, but they didn't have to offer me that work. They didn't have to offer me that job, especially when it's something that like they could have accomplished themselves. They could have just done it themselves. So I think there's an element of that here that there's a condescension of the master to these workers, to these
Yes.
laborers who are not part of his household. They're not slaves. These are not people who are part of his household, who are regular employees. These are people that he goes out into the market to find and to hire. And as we see, some of these like the difference between the ones that are hired and the ones that are not hired until later in the day, the parable's not super clear about what it is, just that they're not hired. It doesn't say the
Right.
lazy ones were left there, the ones
Right.
were that
Exactly.
were ugly or had like limp legs or like just couldn't cut it. It just says like there was some that didn't get hired. So there's a gracious element of this, and that makes the recognition at the end, or the lack of recognition at the end, by these full day laborers, the sort of like recognition, this entitledness, that actually makes it all the worse. It's like the people who are outwardly attached to the covenant of grace. I know all the Baptists in our group, their heads just exploded, but like are outwardly attached to the covenant of grace. Um, who want to somehow complain about like the graciousness of the covenant of grace that they're outwardly attached to. It's just sort of like a form of theological and temporary insanity, I think, and that's what we see on full display here.
It's definitely all grace. You're right. Nobody's going to get injustice in this
Right.
parable. And I think that's definitely exemplified the further out you go in this hiring order. So by the time you get to 5 p.m., which is pretty extraordinary,
Right.
only really like 1 hour remains before
Right.
sunset. It's the end of the working day.
Yeah.
You can imagine like these guys who are being hired at that hour probably can contribute very little in the last hour of the day.
Right.
And but this owner goes out and hires them. And no agreement is stated whatsoever. It's just pure grace. The landowner's question, why do you stand here idle all day? I think to your point, underlies their vulnerability. They were not idle by choice, presumably. And so I think we rightly hear in this like a foreshadowing of those who are called the late in redemptive history, Gentile sinners, the seemingly least qualified for kingdom membership. All of that I think is at play. And it's again this lovely setup of all these groups to help us understand what that kingdom is actually like.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we have this, this is where the sort of dramatic tension turns, right? The end of the day comes, and, the master calls the people that he brought last, right? He calls the people who'd only been there for an hour, and he starts to go down the list of the people who were last, and the people who came in next, and the people who came in next,
Right.
and the workers who had contracted at the beginning of the day, they're watching this happen, and they're kinda going, "Oh, this is gonna be good. Look at that guy's only been here for an hour, and he got a denarius." The logic is probably like, I'm going to get 12 denarius. Like I'm going to get
Bonus
12 days
time.
worth of work. Um, because I think there's an assumption on their part, that the master is fair, that
Right.
he's providing an equitable wage. Of course, the master is fair, but he's providing an equitable wage that's commensurate with the work delivered.
Right.
And that's the key to this parable, I think. The expectation that God helps those who help themselves, right? God rewards those who put in the hard work. God provides blessing or salvation according to the merit provided by the one who's being saved. That perspective is what's on full display here by
Yes.
the people who are the ones who contracted for the full day. They're not thinking about the covenant that they have with this person or the contract they have with this person. They're not thinking about the fact that they agreed to work for the day in order to earn a day's wage. They're thinking about how this actually is going to work out great in their favor. They're looking at this as a strictly merit-based kind of a thing. And you would think that like when the 1 hour people come in, they get a denarius, and then the 3 hour people come in and they get a denarius, you'd think they would pick up on it at some point. But they, in the course of the parable, it doesn't seem that they do. They still get to the bottom of the list and think they're going to get more compared to the other people who all got the same.
Yeah, that display piece is critical to this. It is like complete setup. Like you can imagine the landowner calling everybody together at the end of the day and they're all standing around. Some of them are exhausted because they've again borne all their work in the heat of the day on their backs. They're tired, they're dirty, maybe they're exhausted. And he starts in this reverse order. And by the way, we should note that there is something here that's beautiful in that the landowner is law abiding because
Right.
evening payment is mandated in the Torah. So We see
Right.
all this taking place as to fulfill the law in some ways, but the reversal of the order, that last to first, is like such deliberative and good narrative storytelling and staging, isn't it? Because it ensures that the first hired workers are going to witness the payment of those who work the least. And if without that order, if you just did it the other way around, the moral crisis of the parable just like completely goes away.
Yeah.
So this execution of the payment at the owner's will, it just shows that he's completely independent. His the sovereignty belongs to the master alone. And so this 11th hour worker is receiving a full day's wage for 1 hour of work. That's like an act of sheer generosity. It's not proportional justice. And I think as Reformed people, maybe all of us at some point have had this conversation about predestination and justice and mercy. And again, really, I think putting a crowbar between this idea that nobody is receiving injustice, but some are receiving mercy and grace. And here, these first hired workers seeing this form, like you said, this expectation that they're going to receive more. Like you said, where that came from, it's
Yeah.
just them, right? It's purely manufactured in their own reasoning. It's not anchored in the covenantal promise, and certainly not witnessed in the grace that they should be perceiving as the payments get doled out, like sequentially moving in their reverse order toward those who have worked the longest. But their expectation reveals that they have fundamentally misread like the landowner's character. They're still operating in the register of a contract and not grace.
Yeah. And I think to sort of lock this covenantal frame and sort of like lack of recognition of the covenant into place too. When you look at the language of this parable, and especially kind of what it's following up on, it's coming on the heels of this interaction with this rich young ruler who comes in and he thinks that he's going to earn eternal life by keeping the commandments. And he has this outward sense or this outward display of piety. He's calling Jesus good. He's saying he keeps the commandments. Jesus doesn't even disagree with him actually that he has
Yes.
I think it's implied that no, of course you haven't, but he still is graciously trying to like convince this guy, no, you actually need to abandon your self-righteousness and pursue and follow me. Um, but this is a parable where like other people are listening, right? There's other witnesses. This isn't like the rich young ruler came to him in the middle of the night like Nicodemus. This is something that's happened in the public. So we can anticipate that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the lawyers were all aware of this. They may have been there, but they were at least aware of this happening. And I think there's some language in here that is actually directed at those people. And here's where it comes in. Is you get to we'll start reading again at verse 9. It says, when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, so referring to the people who were hired at the beginning of the day. Now, when those who were hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, right? So this is just unbelievable. As they're receiving the denarius, on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house. Now, just the way that I read that and said the word grumble tells you that word is really important here. If you
Yes.
look at this Greek word and you compare it to the usage of this word in the Septuagint, which of
Yes.
course is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, this word most commonly appears in the wilderness wandering accounts,
Yes.
right? And the primary sin of the Israelites during the wilderness wandering was grumbling against the Lord. And this grumbling against the Lord in that context is not just a general complaining, right? It's not just like a sort of like a general dissatisfaction or like murmuring. This isn't like water cooler frustration about your boss. The grumbling in the Old Testament in this context is a covenantal accusation, right? So this is tied to the accounts where Moses first is told to strike the rock and he does so and the water comes out. And then second is told to speak to the rock, but he strikes it. I won't go into all the details, but the scene that's being displayed there is the people come, they accuse the Lord of abandoning them into the wilderness. And this scene where Moses is set up on the rock and he strikes the rock, that scene is a judicial scene. The people have filed a covenant accusation against the Lord. And in reality, it's the people who have been unfaithful, but the Lord standing in the place of the rock is the one who is struck, right? Jesus was the rock in the wilderness from which the water came. Paul says that in
That's
First
right.
Corinthians, right? So this language of grumbling in this is they're not just complaining about the fact that they didn't get what they thought they were going to. They're questioning the veracity of the covenant that was made. So they're still locked into this merit-based this merit-based idea even more than it seemed at first, right? There's a logic to the idea that like, oh, if the master is actually paying a wage of 1 denarius for per hour, like there's a logic to that. But it's not just that they're saying, and this explains the response of the master. It's not just that they're saying like, hey, wait a second, like the wage rate that you're paying is not right. They're saying you have violated the terms of our covenant in the way that you have paid us. Because it's upon receiving it that they complain or they grumble. And the master says, more or less, like, hey, you agreed with me for 1 denarius. I'm giving you what you've earned. I'm giving you what you agreed on. Why don't you take it and go? So the answer is not to try to justify why he is free to pay these other people more or why he's free to pay these people a perceived less. The answer is, again, they're complaining against the covenant. He is bringing
Right.
it back to the covenant saying, well, here's what the covenant relationship was. You work for the day. I give you a denarius. We're square here. We're on the same page. We've fulfilled our covenant obligations and you've received your reward for that. So I think that's another thing we have to lock in here is this is not just a general idea of like unfairness that's being presented. This is not just a general idea that people are saying the master of the house is unfair. They're saying he's covenantally unfaithful. That's a pretty
Right.
big accusation.
Yeah, that is. Thank you, by the way, for completely stealing the whole Septuagint thing from me. Like I was
Boom.
going hot to the Septuagint to find that reference, and now all I can do is add to it. So that is from at least one of those occasions, a number 16. And I just want to read the verse. This is 16:6. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening you will know that Yahweh has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of Yahweh, for he hears your grumblings against Yahweh and what we are, that you grumble against us. So I'm totally with you. This is not subtle. The workers' first complaint here, the first workers' complaint is like theologically serious. I think that's what you're hitting us on. Like it charges the owner with injustice. And as I read
Right.
it, the grievance has like two layers or two parts, I would say. One is this comparative part, which is basically saying, you made us equal to them. And the
Right.
second would be like a meritorious part. They have worked harder and in worse conditions. And that's why they say things like, it's all inflammatory language, isn't it? Like the scorching heat emphasizes like the real bodily cost. And their complaint, I think if we're honest, it's not irrational, but it's spiritually revealing at least because
Right.
they believe their greater effort merits greater reward and they resent the grace shown to others. So, like you said, they're bringing forward a very serious grievance, and it's not just like, "Hey, we think maybe could you give us a bonus?" But that it
Right.
is a matter of faithfulness. And in fact, like as I'm looking at the Septuagint here, shout out to Logos Bible Software, and I'm seeing that that verb that we're talking about in Exodus 16 is in the imperfect tense. So this is they kept on grumbling, and it is like an echo of Israel's murmuring in the wilderness, which I presume like Matthew certainly had intentionally used there, had that view in part, casting these workers as the same types of those who relate to God through entitlement rather than gratitude. So it's like insult upon insult here, but it is to emphasize this fact that it's no small accusation. It's not subtle. It's meant to be in your face. They're coming in hot with this and they're making a big deal about it.
Yeah. And again, I think like underscoring the covenantal nature of this is so key. And I think, when we look at this, we really have to land that. This is not just saying your wage structure is not right. Because
Right.
and we got to remember they weren't there when the master went and made this bargain or brought these other workers into the vineyard. They weren't there to hear what covenant or contract he did or didn't make. And as we've commented, he didn't even make a covenant with them. He basically
Right.
just said, "I'm going to put you to work and I'll pay you what's fair. I'll pay you what's right." And they went, "Okay, I need the work, and thank you." Like I think that's kind of like the scene here is they're standing there. They recognize they're not going to get a wage for the day, especially these ones that he's coming in at the 11th hour. They're not going to get a wage for the day. And as you said, these are subsistence workers. These are people
Right.
that if you don't get a wage, and this is the grounding of the Old Testament command of paying at the end of the day is that if they don't get their wage, they're not going to eat. They're not going to have food. They're not going to have the money they need to survive. So he comes in and he basically says, like, you don't have a job. That's not going to be good for you. I'll take care of you. I'll give you a job and I'll take care of you. And the ones who are complaining and grumbling, they have no line of sight to that process.
That's
They
right.
make a lot of assumptions about and this goes back to the parable of the talents, which we haven't really talked about yet. there's a lot of assumptions about the nature of this master that the contracted or covenanted day laborers are making that don't turn out to be accurate, right? They assume that he's working, as you said, that he's working on this one-to-one, quid pro quo. You do this, I do that kind of a methodology, and he's actually operating on a basis of a much more basic uh, grace principle. And again, even the principle of hiring these original workers and covenanting with them is gracious in the sense that he didn't have to hire them. So
Right.
so all along the way, they're it's like the epitome of looking a gift horse in the mouth.
Yes.
They've been hired, and so yes, it is right for them to expect their wage, whatever that wage might be. But they are misinterpreting the idea of what the wages are and how the wages are to be delivered. They're applying, this is actually a lot like Job's friends, right? Their
Yes.
logic is not actually all that bad, but they have missing parts of the picture that makes the logic apply differently in this particular situation. They think that this master works on a strict merit-based, you do X amount of work, you receive X amount of money, and this master is actually more functioning on this covenantal principle of I'm going to pay you what's right regardless of what work you've done, what work is actually owed to you. And the master makes this agreement with these other workers to just say, go into the vineyard, and when the evening comes, I'll pay you. Right. Well, he intended to pay them what they needed to survive, regardless of how much work they provided.
That's
So
right.
they're all, even though there's a formal contract to say this group works for the whole day, and this group, and they receive 1 day's labor. At the end of the day, he's graciously providing another day of survival for all of these people for the work that they're putting forward, regardless of how much they actually contribute to his bottom line.
And we see that in verse 13, where the landowner gives his defense. It says, he replied, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for denarius?" Now, the address, because now I'm deep in the Greek, Tony. Here we go. So the address I'm seeing in, again, shout out to Locus Bible Software. This use of friend is not like the warm philos, but like a more formal or distance term of address. It is used elsewhere in Matthew. But I think the point here is that the owner's first line of defense is this contractual point, which you're saying, I have not wronged you. He's kept his agreement precisely. No injustice has been done. And that's crucial. The owner doesn't repudiate justice. He actually fulfills it. He obligates himself and he fulfills that obligation. And what the worker receives is exactly what was promised and exactly what is due. And so by the time he gets to verse 14, where he says, take what belongs to you and go, I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Here, I think this is like the theological beating heart of this whole bad boy. The
Yeah.
landowner explicitly invokes his will, his sovereign freedom to do and to give as he pleases, which is exactly how God behaves. It's not a negation of justice, but this declaration of something beyond justice. It is grace. He exercises his freedom and generosity to those who had no claim. And the command, take what belongs to you and go, is kind of like a royal dismissal. Like you're
Yeah.
saying, we're in the courtroom. He's like, I've ruled on this already. Like, fine, bring your grievance. Here's my ruling. Take what you have and go. Their grumbling has revealed that they're not celebrating the kingdom. They're actually grieving it. So,
Yeah.
I think original invocation of like Jonah is right on the money. It's basically like, are you mad enough? Yeah, I'm mad enough to die. Like, how dare you give me this great shade and then take it away from me? And
Yeah.
in some ways, this is even worse because what they have been given that were promised to them was given to them and they get to retain. And God says, go, or the landowner, as God says, go now and take what is yours. Take what I've given you graciously. But your point that like what supersedes that, the antecedent to all of that, is still God's covenant keeping, covenant making, promise making
Right.
that sets the whole thing up. But I love this idea that, I will choose. It's my desire. It's language of divine volition. And of course, in Reformed theology, this single verb resonates with the entire doctrine of election. It's God's free, sovereign, and gracious will to bestow blessing without reference to merit. Like, praise his name.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we come to kind of the close of this parable, right? And this really is like the punchline of the parable. Like not every punchline or not every parable has like a real specific, like punchy punchline. But when he says, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? Right. That or is a logical connector, right? He's saying like these are the two logical options you have. Either I'm not allowed to do what I want with my belongings, which of course is a ridiculous thesis, right? He's clearly allowed to do what he wishes, and they would want him to do that because what he's done is he's provided them with a job and
Right.
given them a labor.
That's right.
He says, or if I am allowed to do with what I want with my belongings, then you must be mad at me for being generous. Right?
Yes.
Those are the only options. And there's kind of a ridiculous, there's kind of, this is one of those like arguments to absurdity, right? Are you really this small and petty that you're going to be mad at me for being generous to somebody? Right? This is the Jonah effect. This is exactly what happens in Jonah. Is Jonah comes from this. I'm actually preaching in Jonah 2 here in a couple weeks. So I've been studying Jonah's prayer in chapter 2, and Jonah is rescued by the whale. Right? We think of the whale sometimes as the judgment that God sends, and there may be an element of that, but Jonah views the whale as a vessel of salvation. Right? He thanks the Lord for rescuing him from the deep of the ocean and from the bars of the earth and the mountains under the sea. And there's a lot of reasons textually to see not just Jonah's prayer, but in the actual narrative itself, that the whale is the way that God saves Jonah from drowning in the sea, not the way that he punishes him. And so
Right.
he comes from this regenerative salvation process, right? He comes out of the whale. He's been praying and praising God in the whale, and he's been thanking God for his salvation, for rescuing him from the deep. And then he gets to Nineveh and he proclaims this message. And then he goes right back to like, I knew you were going to forgive those chumps. And
Right.
and you could almost see God saying, like, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Am I not allowed to save all of these people and all of these cattle from destruction? Am I not allowed to do that? Or Jonah, do you begrudge my generosity? With the implication of, do you begrudge the generosity that I showed you when I didn't let you sink to the bottom of the ocean and drown to death? Or do you begrudge the generosity that I showed you where the whale was a vehicle of salvation that brought you to safety rather than digesting you and
Right.
killing you? And
Right.
that's the same force I think that we have here at the end of this parable. He's looking at the people, and there's an element of like, put yourself in those shoes. It's almost like a subtle retelling of the parable of the unforgiven servant, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the people who needed a day's labor, were not getting paid, were not being hired, and then all of a sudden someone generously gives them the very survival that they need for the following day. You're going to begrudge me that kind of generosity? If you were that person, you certainly wouldn't do that. Then there's also the like, you're going to begrudge me my generosity, with the implication of like the generosity of having hired you in the first place. Could have hired anybody else. It's really this rhetorical master move. And then again, then this is exactly what Jesus does. The people who are listening to him in many instances identify that the parable is told against them. They identify that the parable is actually a form of judgment against them. I have
Right.
to think that the Pharisees and the scribes, especially the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, who only had the Pentateuch, only recognized the Pentateuch. I have to think they're coming out of this, looking at it and going, he just called us the grumbling Israelites. Can you believe this guy?
Right.
Yeah, he did. Like, that's
Yeah.
exactly what you are. You are the grumbling Israelites. And that's the force of this parable, on the heels of this young man who walks away sad, right? I didn't look at the Greek yet, but walks away disturbed at the fact that he's not going to get the salvation he believes is guaranteed to him because of his obedience to the law. He's like, I have to do one more thing. I have to work one more work to get the salvation. I'm going to walk away sad at that. Well, the answer is that he's begrudging the generosity of the Lord in providing salvation apart from his merit and apart from his works.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's beautiful. By the way, just so like you said, Tony, we should give it a warning so people don't like at us or send a bunch of random messages to our inbox at reformedbrotherhood.com. We know great fish, whale. We're using them interchangeably. Everybody
It's
calm
true.
down, just in case. Could have been a
Yeah,
whale.
I mean,
It was great fish. Doesn't matter.
one of the gospels uses the word whale, so I think we're fine.
Yeah, we're
It
covering
uses the
all
word
bases
whale.
there.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that because the climax of this is like something interesting, I think, in the orientation of the final statement. So this idea of the last, see, I already got it twisted. So the last will be first and the first last. It actually does reverse the formulation that we were just looking at in chapter 19, where Jesus says the first will be last and the last first. Man, say that like 6 times
I
fast.
know, it's tough.
So but it doesn't complete, it does complete like this kind of a inclusio, I guess, around the parable. The inversion, I think, is not merely like a social statement in light of what's unfolding in this drama, but it is soteriological. So those who approach God on the basis of this accumulated merit, like you've been saying, or religious piety, or even like, dare I say, covenant superiority or seniority, will find that those calculations are totally irrelevant in the kingdom economy. And those that receive the grace of God with empty hands, the Gentile, the sinners, the 11th hour called, if you want to, those are going to stand fully on equal footing before this sovereign owner. And the saying then resists any kind of triumphalism or celebrating over somebody else. The last are not exalted because of their lateness, but because of God's great grace or the owner's great grace. And so I think that's the thing that we get to kind of settle on. Like you take a deep breath at the end of this, because really most of us are this 11th hour called. And again, it's like understanding and putting yourself in the place of the humble, the place who is a sinner, because that's whom God has come and condescended to save in his loving kindness. Like his hesed is for those people who recognize that they're exactly the kind of ones who need that. And so here we find it's much better, like you're saying, to be in the place in some ways of that younger brother who comes and repents than to be the older brother who is stubborn and finds some reason, some justification to come before God with self-righteous grievances or what you believe to be self-righteous complaints in his kingdom and in his courtroom, because you do not want to stand in that place. Even I remember there are times like in Israel's history when they're in the wilderness where they come against Moses and Aaron, even for like their relationship with like foreign women. And they complain to God, and God basically says, stop complaining about my servants. Even there, like you must be very careful. I guess if you want to come against God with what you think are your self-righteous grievances, you better not miss. And so here
Yeah.
God is saying it's better for you to humble yourselves, that he avenges this kind of behavior. He comes hard against those who are prideful, but instead the humble he lifts up, the humble he comes and he rescues. Like I said, even in Jonah, what we find there is the whale, the great fish, is God's formation of Jonah as a loving father who disciplines and chastises, not as one who punishes. And so here too, we find some of that echo, that it's better to understand that we don't want to be among the complainers. What we want to be is among those who are willing to recognize and to receive God's gracious provision for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last little bit of nerdy Greek here that I think underscores this covenantal aspect of this that we're talking about. When he says to them, or do you begrudge my generosity? If the video caught my perplexed look, it's because I was trying to figure out why the word I was related to this. The phrase here is actually, do you give me the evil eye for my generosity?
Yes, this
And
is
I
good.
think what it's getting at here is he's saying, like, do you curse me
Yes,
because of my generosity? So that ties into this covenantal language. He's basically saying, either I'm allowed to do what I want with what belongs to me, or are you going to curse me probably in like a covenantal sense? Are you going to call down the covenantal curses because I was generous to somebody else?
right.
And it's in this way, like that. So is not, it's not therefore, it's a demonstrative. So it's in this way, in this way, where those who receive God's generosity recognize it, and those who fail to recognize God's generosity are dismissed because of it. It's in that way that the last will be first, right? The
Yes,
people who are sold out to the generosity of God and they trust him, and they yes, they come and they work, right? But the response of a day laborer at the 11th hour, when someone comes and says, look, I've still got work to do, it's one of overjoyed response. It's not thinking they're going to earn a lot of money. It's not thinking they just get to work and they're thankful and they trust that person. And that's what we see is salvation in the Christian faith, is we turn to Christ. We recognize his generosity. We trust that he's going to do what's right. He's going to take care of us. And in that way, the last will be first. Those who are late to the party, those who, not necessarily, like, this isn't necessarily a parable. It's saying, like, like the people who have deathbed conversions are somehow the first. It's not temporal in the sort of idea of like those who've been saved for the longest are represented by the day laborers, and those who are sort of new
right.
converts are represented by the 11th hour people. It's saying those who those who abandon themselves to the mercy and generosity of God, those people will be first in the kingdom of God. And those people who are so like tied to and connected to and um sort of locked into this idea of covenant merit as the primary economy of how God operates, um, those people will be last. I'm not entirely sure, like this is still all operating within the kingdom of heaven. This is what the kingdom of heaven on earth appears like. So I think I don't think we're going to do another episode. I think we probably have covered this sufficiently, but it'd be interesting to sort of tease out, like, what does that mean for the people who are in God's kingdom?
Right.
And let's just say it, like, sorry, Reformed Baptists, like in God's kingdom, who are not apparently not actually sold out to the grace of God here. What does it mean for those people who are in God's kingdom and are now the last? Are they the last in terms of the last who will still be saved? Are these the ones Paul talks about who are saved as though through fire, or is there something else going on here? I would love to hear people sort of theorize and think about that as they've listened to this. And Jesse, how could they do that if they wanted to talk to us about this little
Man,
question I've dropped?
that was like so smooth. So smooth. Yeah, listen, people, you already know. I know I don't need to say it, but like I'm contractually, covenantally, by way of the podcast, obligated to tell you that there's a little corner of the internet in this messaging app that's called Telegram where we all hang out. And by all of us, I mean all of us except for you who's listening right now that's not in it. Why are you not in it? So here are the instructions on how to find your way there. Go to your browser, type in t.me/Reformed Brotherhood, t.me/Reformed Brotherhood. That link will take you to that corner of the world. And you can see we have a bunch of channels set up where people are conversing from everything to just general topics, to the episode, to prayer requests, to food reviews, to just good, plain Christian, Reformed, theological fun. There, I said it. It's
Yeah.
just fun. So come hang out. Go to t.me/Reformed Brotherhood.
Yeah. And for those of you who are sick of us promoting the Telegram channel, I'll just ask you, are we not allowed to do what we choose with our airtime? Or do you begrudge us our free podcast?
Yeah. Listen, do you have an evil eye? And you said that so well, Tony. I love a good Jewish idiom. Like, for instance, I love that when we read of God being long suffering, the text literally says he's long nosed.
Yeah.
And here, this idea of the evil eye is like this Jewish idiom connoting like envy or stinginess or like miserliness or parsimoniousness. So, because I just happened to look that up, like Proverbs 28:22 says, a man with an evil eye hurries after wealth and does not know that want will come upon him. That's so
Yeah.
good. So
Yeah.
don't have the evil eye. Come hang out. Come hang out with us.
Well, Jesse, I'm glad to be back. I feel like I'm back in the saddle.
Yeah,
Or,
you are.
I don't know, back in, I don't know, in the field. I don't know what the right analogy is.
Backstreet's back.
I was Backstreet's back. Yeah, I was trying to figure out whether I was going to go with a Backstreet Back joke or a Slim Shady joke. In my mind, they sort of merged
Okay,
together.
yeah.
Like if I had good technical audio skills, I
Like
might make
again.
a sweet mashup of some really awesome out of date, like white boy semi hip hop or something like that. But I'm not going to do that because if anything is worse
Trending
than
so
Slim
well.
Shady, it's me trying to synthesize Slim Shady. So I'm not going to do that. But I'm glad to be back, and it is the real Slim Shady. I'm the real Slim Shady. Something. But
This
yeah,
is
it's going to be
more than I
great. We're
could have
going to
hoped
keep
for.
going in the parables. We don't know how long it's going to take. We didn't even know we were going to do this parable tonight. We sat down
That's
and we're
true.
like, what are we talking about tonight? We're like, let's just keep going in the parables. So we're going to keep at it. So stick with us. Pick up a good commentary, read ahead, pick up a good, good Bible translation and follow along with us, and join us in the Telegram chat so we can kind of keep talking about this and having these conversations long after the episode ends.
You got it. Well, listen, everybody's been hearing me say it, but man, are they going to be glad to hear you say it. Honor everyone.
Love the brotherhood.